Friends, I welcome you to my channel. Before listening to this story, I will ask you to put a like and subscribe. You are not difficult, and I am pleased. And here we go. None of this bothered Maria as she headed from the train station to the hotel. She was there for one purpose only, and the sooner this was over, the sooner she could get back to her children. Men's heads turned as she walked down the street, dragging her suitcase behind her. They say there are two types of women for men: the ones you want to get into bed, and the ones you want to bring home to introduce to your mother. Maria managed to establish herself in both camps. She was 178 centimeters tall, taller in heels, with a trim figure that belied the fact that she had two children. Her long, dark hair was scattered over her shoulders, framing an oval face with piercing blue eyes. She had the elegant gait of a woman accustomed to high heels, and her hips swayed as she walked. Today she was wearing a black skirt suit. The tailored jacket emphasized her slim waist, the hem of the skirt falling just above her knees. She first saw him as she approached the hotel. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with a confident gait. A little over 40, she thought as she looked at him. His hair was short and dark, but starting to gray. He was wearing a dark-colored linen suit. The brown loafers on his feet completed the image of a man elegantly dressed and confident. She tried to picture her husband William in such clothes. It would suit him, she thought. William, sometimes Will, but never Bill, was the same way. Tears came to her eyes at the thought of her husband. It'll be over soon, she told herself, knowing deep down that it would never end. She reached the hotel entrance and pushed the door with her left hand. The door didn't budge. She changed hands, so that her suitcase was now in her left hand, and pushed hard with her right. The door still didn't move. "Allow me," came a voice from behind her back. A linen-clad hand reached past her and opened the door. She was overcome with embarrassment. "You must think me such a fool," she said as he held the door for her. "Not at all. Your mind was obviously on other things. I'm glad to be of service. Now, please, after you." Her face was still flushed as she walked up to the front desk to check in. She noticed that the man kept his distance while she checked in and got her key. She looked back at him as she took her key. "Thank you for your help with the door. How long will you be staying here?" What was she doing asking a strange man how long he would be here? She meant it as polite conversation, but it could be taken as a show of interest. "Just for one night. I don't expect to be here much after tomorrow." "Just one night," he said, which eased her embarrassment. She wouldn't like having him around all week, imagining she was interested in him. Maria stepped into the elevator and turned around to see him looking at her. She smiled and waved at him as the doors closed. As the elevator touched down, she cursed herself again for that wave of interest. The hotel was only a 3-star. She had chosen it because of its location, so she was relieved to find a rather nice, clean room. She lay down on the bed and found it quite comfortable. In no time at all, she had unpacked and showered. She sat down on the bed and called her mother, who was watching her children. Tears came to her eyes as she talked to her children. She missed them so much. She watched the news on the television and wished she had brought a book with her. Making a mental note to buy one the next day, she went downstairs for dinner. In the hotel restaurant, she was pointed to her table. She didn't see him enter, but as she raised her wine glass, she felt someone's eyes on her. She turned, and when she caught his gaze, he smiled at her and raised his glass. Throughout dinner, she looked over and found him watching her. She found herself in a quandary. On the one hand, she didn't want to encourage him. On the other, she desperately wanted someone to talk to, and he seemed like a nice person. She felt a slight disappointment when he stood up and left the restaurant and walked out of the hotel instead of approaching. After finishing her meal and draining her glass of wine, Maria walked out of the restaurant. She spotted a bar at the other end of the lobby. Maybe there would be someone there she could talk to take her mind off the business of the day ahead. She was drinking her second vodka tonic when he walked in and sat down on the stool next to her. The bartender approached and the man ordered a beer. "Can I buy the girl a drink?" Maria hesitated. "It's just a drink," he said. "I need company, and you seem to be lonely. My name is Paul, by the way." She smiled at him. "Nice to meet you, Paul. I'm Maria. I'll have a vodka and tonic, if that's okay." Paul took his glass and ordered another for Maria. The bartender returned and Paul took both drinks. He nodded toward a vacant table. Why don't we take this somewhere a little more private? Okay. They walked over to the table and sat down. I thought you went out for the night, she said. No, I just went for a walk down by the river. I probably won't be able to do that anytime soon, so I thought I'd make the most of a beautiful evening. I didn't even know there was a river walk in this town, but that can't be what brought you to Maidstone. No, I'm here for what you might call a final interview. If things go as I expect, I'll be gone for a few years. That sounds intriguing. Where are you going to go? I don't know exactly. I don't think it's decided yet. Oh, you make it sound so mysterious. You're not going to be some kind of James Bond, are you? No, nothing like that, although I will work for Her Majesty. What about you? What brings a beautiful married lady to the Maidstone Hotel to talk to a strange man? Maria took a sip of her drink and rubbed her rings. Actually, I'm a widow, and I don't think you really want to know about me. Oh, but I do. Besides, you look like you need someone to talk to. I'll get you another drink, and you can decide if you want to talk to me. Paul got up and came back with another beer and a vodka tonic. As he set her glass down, Maria touched his hand, running her fingers along his ring finger. There's a hollow where the ring used to be. Is it for me, or is that the reason for the sadness in your eyes? It's not the story you want to hear, but I do. I'm a good listener, and you need to tell it. Come on, you tell me your story, and I'll tell you mine. Paul noticed that she was starting to get a little tipsy. She was getting confused and stammering as she formed sentences. Okay, I'll tell it, but then it's your turn. Okay, you first, then me. Maria took a sip of beer from Paul's glass. There's no alcohol in that beer. You had to be drunk to keep me company. I need a clear head for the morning. I can't go to a job interview hungover. Now that you've exposed me, do you still want to hear my story? Maria nodded. Okay. I used to work at a university. I loved doing research and teaching students. The problem was the lousy paycheck. I never made enough money for Josie. Josie is my wife. She always needed more. When two kids came along, Alex, now 7, and Kate, 5, money got even tighter. Josie started working overtime in the evenings, and at my university I insisted on a pay rise. The thing is, universities have set pay scales and you can't progress without publishing your work. I needed to publish more, but I didn't have the time. I couldn't work on publications during the day without neglecting my regular work. I would have done it in the evening, but I was babysitting while Josie was at work. Even when we were both working, it was still never enough. When Josie's brother told me that he was making a lot more money as a truck driver, I wondered about that. The problem was that Josie thought about it too. To her, the increased income meant more than the fact that I loved my job. Long story short, she was using the kids as emotional blackmail to get me to quit my job and rent a big truck. Her brother gave me all the contacts, and soon I was making deliveries all over the country. Josie threw in some overtime, and for a while we were doing okay. Then I found out that while I was away, she found a boyfriend. Oh, Paul, that's terrible. How did you find out? Her boyfriend told me. He sent me a multimedia message. Pictures and videos of him using her. The thing is, he used her phone to send it. I was expecting a love message from my wife, and I got a gloating message from her lover and all these pictures and videos. She tried to tell me it was just a one-time thing and that he sent the message because she told him they would never do it again. So you didn't believe her? You should have seen the look in her eyes. She hadn't looked at me like that in years. She was thrilled when he used her. I couldn't look at her again without seeing those images. Divorce was the only option. Once Josie realized that I was serious about divorce, she became horrified. She told me he wasn't the first and wouldn't be the last. It was my fault that I wasn't making enough money for her to stay home. I should have had access to my children after the divorce, but I haven't seen them in 5 months. Either they are unwell, or they have a special day off. Then they go on vacation during my time, that sort of thing. Maria stood up, walked over to Paul, kissed him on the cheek, and pressed him against her chest. Oh, you poor man. How could she do that to you? No wonder you want to run away. What about her lover? What happened to him? She began to wiggle on her high heels, and Paul felt the need to help her back to her seat. Once she was seated again, he continued. Well, of course, he was married, but there was no point in pursuing him. He died in a traffic accident about 3 weeks after he sent me that message. Does his wife know? No, I don't think so. I don't see any point in adding to her misery. The poor woman has lost her husband. What good would it do her to find out that he really was a worthless turd? Well, if it were my will, I think I'd want her to know. It would help her move on. Right now she looks at him as some sort of saint, and to her, no man will ever compare to him. If she finds out he's a bastard, it's easier for her to find someone else. You have to tell her, Paul, you have to. At first she'll hate you for it, but later she'll be glad you did. Promise me you'll tell her. Paul shook his head. Maria stomped her foot and spoke sharply. Promise me, or I won't tell you anything about me. All right. Okay, I promise. Maria took another sip of her drink. So, now you want to know why I'm here. I'm here to come face to face with the man who killed my husband, my William. Someone killed him? Oh my God, that's horrible. How did it happen? Well, they call it an accident, but he killed him, just as sure as if he had pointed a gun at him. He may not have meant to, but he did nothing to avoid it. Maria, you're speaking in riddles. How did he kill William? He crushed him. Poor Will was sitting in his car on the side of the road, and this man drove a 40-ton truck into him. He went off the road onto the side of the road and crushed his car like a matchbox with my Will inside. He didn't stand a chance. Tears streamed down Maria's cheeks. Her anger triggered a rush of adrenaline, and her speech became less slurred. She blotted her cheeks with a tissue. Paul waited for her to calm down. But it was an accident, right? I mean, he didn't hit him on purpose, did he? Maria began to sob. Paul put his arms around her and pulled her against him. The sobs stopped and she continued. He was texting, Paul. Witnesses saw it. He had his phone on the steering wheel and was texting. That's why he lost control of his truck. He was going 60 miles an hour down Detling Hill, and he was texting. My beloved husband had to die so he could send the message. Paul cradled her head against his chest as she cried. The bartender started to approach, but Paul held up his hand, showing that everything was okay. Maria put one arm around him and pressed her face hard against his. Slowly, she pulled herself together and pushed herself away from him. I'm sorry, Paul. I think I can handle it. She took another sip of her drink. Sorry, I have to go to the ladies' room. Paul watched her stagger toward the restroom. When she returned, her face looked better, but he noticed she was still drunk. She got the bartender's attention and ordered another drink. She asked Paul if he wanted the same drink, but he shook his head. She returned to her seat and asked, What else do you want to hear? Well, you could tell me about William. What kind of man was he? Maria's face brightened, and the sparkle returned to her eyes. Do you want me to describe him? He's tall, dark-haired, and handsome. That's just the beginning. He had gorgeous eyes. I could get lost in those eyes. When I was with him, I felt like the most important woman in the world. I saw other women looking at me, wondering what I had done to deserve a man like that. Even the girls at work, they all wanted to dance with him at Christmas parties. When he left them, I could see the envy in their eyes as they looked at me. So he was good-looking, but that wasn't all, was it? No, he wasn't, and that's not what he was at all. He was the best husband and father I could wish for. When he wasn't traveling, he attended all the kids' school events. We didn't need anything, and he was the kindest, most loving man. I used to see other people struggling to keep their marriages together, and I felt so successful. It sounds like he was like a real angel. No wonder you miss him so much. Maria smiled at him. Oh no, Will wasn't an angel. He was pretty ruthless at work. He was willing to do anything to make a sale. Then, of course, there was rugby. Don't tell me he was a bad loser. Will always said there were no such things as good losers, only losers. To make matters worse, he was a terrible winner. Will never understood the meaning of the word magnanimous in winning. When his team won, he was ruthless to his opponents. So there was another side to him. Oh, yeah, but he never brought any of that into the house. That murderer robbed me of a model husband. Talking about her husband definitely brought the blush back to Maria's face. Well, what did that driver boyfriend have to say for himself? Nothing, and that made it even more painful. He didn't even say he was sorry he did it. Ah, well, he wouldn't have been allowed to do it. His insurance company would have had a fit. Legally, an apology is like an admission of guilt. He'd need insurance to keep working. You mean he could still be driving? I hadn't thought of that. Well, he could have a family. He still has to put food on the table. Oh, yeah, I guess so. I pictured him as lonely, but you're right. He probably does have a family. Actually, that just makes it worse. If he has a family, he should be more responsible. The bartender brought her a drink. This should be the last one. The bar is closing now, he said. He walked back to the bar and started to lower the shutters. So how are you going to confront him? She took a big sip from her glass. That's why I chose this hotel. It's conveniently located near the courthouse. He's supposed to go on trial tomorrow. I'm going to be there. He's going to have to look me in the eye and realize what he's done. I understand. And what do you want to happen? I hope they lock him up and throw away the key, but that's unlikely to happen. He might even get away with it. The police never found the text message in his phone, so they don't have good evidence. What are you going to do if he walks out of the courtroom with a verdict of no jail time? I don't know. I haven't thought that far ahead. She drained her glass and stood up. As soon as she stood up, she fell back in her chair. Oops. I guess I drank more than I thought. It's been so long since I've had alcohol. Paul stood up and took her hands. Let me help you, he said, lifting her up from her seat. She stood up. Paul stood beside her and put his arm around her waist. She put one arm around him. Now, my knight in shining armor, would you like to escort me to my room? It's room 211. Do you think you can find it? I'm sure I can manage, he said, leading her to the elevator. When the doors closed, she turned to him. You know, Paul, I really don't want to be alone tonight. Do you think you could? The elevator came to a stop. Oh, Maria, I don't think that's a good idea. You've had too much to drink. You're going to hate yourself and me in the morning. I won't do it, and in the morning you'll be gone. We'll never have to see each other again. They got off the elevator and walked down the hall. Maria held on to Paul as tightly as he could. Just because I won't be here doesn't mean you won't hate me or yourself. They walked to her door and Maria turned to Paul. It's okay, Paul, I understand. Why would a man like you be interested in an old widow like me? That's not true, Maria. If it were otherwise, wild horses wouldn't keep me out of this room. She turned away, found her key, and opened the door. She reached out and took Paul's hand. Please, Paul, I don't think I can bear to be alone tonight. Don't make me beg. Paul reluctantly followed her into the room. Maria took off her shoes and then walked over to the minibar. Don't you think you've had enough? Paul asked. Maria turned around with 2 bottles of water in her hand. Which do you prefer, with or without gas? Paul smiled and chose ungassed. She brought him the water, and as he took the bottle, she tilted his head and kissed him. He felt his resolve slipping away. Despite what his head was saying, he knew he wanted her as much as she wanted him. You know, you look a lot like him. Like who? William, my husband. In some ways you look a lot like him. Paul took off his jacket and hung it on the back of a chair. Maria looked at him. He was maybe a little more muscular. He'd been working out a lot, and then of course there was the rugby. Maria, are you sure you want to do this? She walked over, sat on his lap, and started stroking his cheek. Will you stop worrying about me? I need to be with someone tonight, and from what you're saying, you might not get a chance to be with a woman for a while. Why don't we help each other out? She kissed him, and this time Paul was very responsive. When they broke the kiss, Maria stood up, undid the waistband of her skirt, then let it fall to the floor. When it fell, it revealed the most beautiful, shapely legs he had seen in a long time. She was wearing stockings and a girdle, which always turned Paul on. Maria was still unsteady on her feet as she stood in front of him, spreading her legs. She looked down at the bulge in his pants. I see you like something about this old widow. There's nothing old about you, and yes, I find everything about you attractive. If it were any other way, you'd be fighting me off with a stick. Maria took his hands and lifted him to his feet. She kissed him. No more protests. I really need to be loved tonight. You seem like a good man. You're divorced, I'm a widow, so we're not hurting anyone. Just give me this night. I promise I'll still respect you in the morning. She undid his belt and unzipped his zipper. His pants fell to the floor. His aroused manhood protruded clearly in his boxers. She got down on one knee and pulled off his boots. Paul removed his pants, and standing up, she picked up his pants and hung them on the back of a chair. Unbuttoning his shirt, she ran her hands over his chest. Not bad. You keep yourself in shape. Well, I'm not into bodybuilding, but I like to keep in shape. She pulled the shirt off his shoulders and tossed it on the chair. Stepping back, she turned around, put one foot on the bed and undid the garter on her stocking. She slowly slid the stocking down her slender leg. She turned to Paul. Will loved watching me do this. I can understand it. It's so beautiful. See, I told you that you're a lot like him. Would you like to do the other leg? Oh, yes. Paul sat down on the bed, spreading his legs. Maria took her leg out and put it between Paul's legs. She undid her garter and waited for Paul to start. When he touched the inside of her thigh, she felt a shiver run through her body. Placing his hands on either side of her leg, he began to stroke downward, removing her stocking. He smiled at her. This is the most erotic thing I've ever done. And this we haven't started yet. Standing with her back to the floor, she removed her garter belt. The rest is up to you. Paul stood up and enclosed her in an embrace. Paul stood up and threw back the covers before picking Maria up and placing her on the bed. Paul suddenly realized why she wanted him there. He reminded her of William, and he was his replacement. He knew he should be offended, but nothing this woman said or did could offend him. If she took any comfort in believing he was her late husband, he was more than happy to provide it. Love me, Will, love me now. Paul rolled onto his back and Maria quickly climbed on top of him. Oh yes, Will, yes. Her head threw back. Her back arched and her breath came out in loud wheezes. She suddenly relaxed and collapsed on top of him. Maria collapsed onto Paul's chest and lay there as she came to her senses, and he softened inside her. Wake up, sleepyhead. I think we need to clean up. Maria slipped out of bed and headed for the bathroom, and Paul enjoyed looking at her body as she left him. He heard the shower running. 5 minutes later, she was out of the bathroom and back to the bed. Paul kissed her and got out of bed. By the time he came back, Maria was asleep. He gathered his clothes and went back into the bathroom to get dressed. He leaned over and kissed her cheek before he left. Maria woke up at 8 a.m. after the best night's sleep she could remember. What a dream she had had. Her Will was back with her. They were making love, and it was wonderful. Her hand slid over where he lay. Then she felt it, a wet spot. It had to be a dream, but dreams don't leave wet spots like that. Her head throbbed. Gradually, it all came back to her as she found her purse and pulled out a couple of paracetamol tablets. She headed for the bathroom. She remembered Paul. Oh my God, she said to herself. I threw myself at him. After washing and dressing, she decided to seek out Paul before he left and apologize for her behavior. On her way to the restaurant for breakfast, she asked the receptionist for his room number. Excuse me, Mrs. Lancaster, the desk clerk told her. Mr. Robertson checked out about 10 minutes ago. I think he was on his way to the post office, so you might catch him there if you hurry. Maria cursed to herself. No, it wasn't anything important, thank you. She ate breakfast and headed towards the courthouses. Upon arrival, she was greeted by a bailiff who gave her name and pointed her in the direction of the prosecutor in the case. He told her that there was no real need for her presence. I'm sorry, Mrs. Lancaster, but you are not a witness. We only need you for the victim's statement, which will only come after a conviction, if any. But we'll get a conviction, won't we? I can't say. Witnesses say he was using his cell phone. The only phone the police found hasn't sent a text in hours. His online records confirm that. If the defense uses this to introduce an element of doubt, he could get away with it. Tears came to Maria's eyes. I want to see him. Where am I supposed to go? Like I said, we won't need you until we have a conviction. If you want to watch the proceedings, you'll have to sit in the public gallery. He walked her to the entrance to the public gallery and left her. Maria found a seat on the front pew of the gallery. She had a fine view of the whole hall. She looked at her watch. It was 10 o'clock in the morning. As she made herself comfortable, 2 bailiffs ushered the defendant inside. Suddenly, she didn't feel very good. The defendant they brought in was Paul. She ran out to the restroom and managed to do so before her breakfast tried to exit the same way he had entered. By the time she returned to court, Paul was in the dock and the proceedings were in full swing. The clerk read the charges. Paul Arthur Robinson, you are charged with dangerous driving and causing the death of William Robert Lancaster. How do you plead? Guilty or not guilty? Guilty, Your Honor. There was silence in the courtroom. The defense attorney looked surprised. He jumped up and shouted to the judge, "I ask for a 10-minute recess, my lord. I don't think my client fully understands the implications of his statement. Mr. Jeffers, am I to understand that this statement came as a surprise to you?" "Yes, my lord, it is." "Very well. 10 minutes. May I speak?" Paul asked. The judge nodded to him. "I don't need 10 minutes, Your Honor. I know the consequences of my statement, but I can get you out." Jeffers hissed at him furiously. "Not anymore. You can't." He looked at the judge. "I have a chance to tell you what happened, right?" "Yes, you can make a plea for leniency." "All right, then let's get on with it." It dragged on long enough. It took the court 10 minutes to calm down. Paul was led to the witness stand. As he entered the box, he looked at Maria and with only one lip said, "I'm sorry." She only looked at him with contempt. "You bastard," she whispered back to him with just one lip. The judge told him to continue with his statement. "Your Honor, the witnesses were mistaken. I did not send a text message just before the accident. Make up your mind, Mr. Robertson. You plead guilty, and now you're saying the witnesses were wrong." "I didn't send a text message, Your Honor. I got a video message from my wife. Sometimes when I'm away, my wife sends me text messages with pictures and videos. You know the kind of thing, intimate photos, videos. She does it to show me how much she misses me." Paul continued. "This message came from my wife's cell phone, but it wasn't from my wife. What I saw was another man bragging about making love to my wife. That sounds more like defense than mitigation, Mr. Robertson." "No, it's not, Your Honor. I know I should never have picked up that phone, because I did. A family lost their father and a wife lost her husband. It's something I will always regret." "So what happened when you saw this message?" "I really don't know, Your Honor. I don't remember much about the road. I must have been driving automatically. When my truck started to lurch a little bit, it brought me back to reality. I saw that the car in front of me had stopped, but hadn't moved completely off the road. I was about to pull into the outside lane, but when I looked in my mirror, I saw a car overtaking me. I hit the brakes as hard as I could and just prayed there was no one in the car." "Looks like your prayers weren't answered." "They weren't answered, Your Honor. I am truly sorry for the impact I had on this family." Paula finished, and Maria took the stand. She told the court about life without William. She talked about the impact on the children of having their father taken away from them. By 1 p.m., the judge was ready to pass sentence. He acknowledged that the effect of reporting would have been traumatic and recognized the fact that a guilty plea saved taxpayers' money. He handed down the sentence, 5 years in prison. Paul's head dropped as he was led away. Maria watched him intently, but he never once lifted his head. Her feelings were in turmoil. She wanted to kill him for taking her William, but at the same time she felt sorry for him. He too had a loss, and that loss had led to what had happened. At 9 a.m. on Monday morning, Maria's friend, Sally, welcomed her back to work. "Well, are you feeling better now?" "Not really, Sally, no." "I suppose not. 5 years is not that long to take a person's life." "That's not what I mean. I thought I'd make him realize what he'd done to me. I wanted him to suffer like I did. I expected to hate him." When he explained to the court what had happened, I realized that his life had shattered the same day he shattered mine. Now I don't know how I feel. "Well, you have a lot of work piling up, so you have plenty of distractions. By the way, if he pleaded guilty, what took you so long to get home?" "I took a week off, and Mom and Dad were babysitting, so I decided to join them for a few days. We got home yesterday." "Well, I hope the break did you good, girl, because you've got a mountain of work to overcome." The two women went off in different directions and didn't meet again until lunchtime, when Sally poked her head through Maria's door. "We're going to have lunch today. Do you want to come?" "No thanks, Sally. I have to go to the sorting office. The letter carrier tried to deliver a package while I was away." "Oh, something nice. I hope." "I have no idea. I'm not expecting anything." "Well, I'll see you later." Maria went out to pick up the package and was back in her office, finishing her sandwich when Sally returned. She noticed the unopened parcel lying on the desk. "You don't mean you still haven't opened it, do you? Come on, girl. Let's see what the surprise is." Maria giggled, then picked up the package. Using a letter opener, she removed the wrapping brown paper and cut the tape that held the cardboard box together. Inside, she found a smartphone, a charger, and an envelope. Written on the outside of the envelope were the words, "I'm sorry to have to do this to you, but a promise is a promise." Maria had a premonition of impending doom, but Sally was looking at the phone. "Wow, that's quite a surprise. My brother has one just like it. Do you have any idea how much it costs?" Maria trembled as she opened the envelope. Inside was a short note. "Hi, Maria. You'll find everything you need on your phone in the messages folder. You need to look at the messages from Josie. You can do what you want with it. That includes the phone. I won't need it anymore. Paul." Sally excitedly grabbed her phone, turned it on, and looked for messages from Josie. There they were. Maria tried to stop her. "Sally, I really don't think I dash." Her speech was interrupted by the sound of Will's voice. Maria grabbed her phone and sat as if hypnotized. "Hey, puppy." Will's voice came through the phone. "Just letting you know that there's a big dog in town, and your beautiful little fool just can't get enough of him. Oh, don't worry. I'll make sure she throws you a bone every now and then. But when the big dog is in town, she'll come running to it in heat. You don't believe me, do you? You think it's some kind of evil joke by someone who stole her phone. Well, do you hear that noise in the background? That's her in the shower, cleaning herself up, waiting stupidly for you to come home. When I'm done talking, you can see some excerpts from today's meeting. Turn it off," Maria shouted as the image changed to a woman with dark hair and green eyes. Sally didn't move. "Turn it off." She reached out, grabbed the phone, and hurled it across the room. Sally stood watching her for a moment, her friend's eyes burning with rage. "So, now you know. I'm really sorry, but I couldn't be the one to tell you. I don't have many girlfriends. I couldn't afford to lose the best of them. You knew, but you didn't tell me. Why didn't you? Why would you do that? We all knew. You must have noticed how the girls acted around him at Christmas parties. Mary's octopus, we nicknamed him, because he seemed to have his hands everywhere. Some thought you turned a blind eye, others saw that you were stupefied by him. If we told you, you would call us liars and say we were jealous. I knew it would take something like that, out of his own mouth, to make you believe it. I love you, Maria. You're my oldest and dearest friend. I didn't want to lose you to a jerk who couldn't keep his pants closed. No, that can't be true. It just can't be. Mawa wouldn't do anything like that. He just wouldn't. It must be some kind of trick." "It wasn't a trick, Maria. Do you want to watch the video again?" No, I never want to see it again." "Aha, so you know it's real." "I don't know anything else." She sat down and started sobbing, and Sally got up. "I'm going to see my boss and ask for a family leave for you, and then I'll take you home." Sally walked out of the office. She returned 10 minutes later and found Maria sobbing. She put her arm around her friend. "Come on, honey, let's get you home." Sally walked over and picked up the phone. It was completely dead. She looked at Maria again. "You know who I really feel sorry for? The poor guy who got that message. I wonder what happened to him. He got 5 years.